The shocking fates of Jesus' 12 apostles, what they never told you about their dark endings. In a time shrouded in mystery and whispers of the supernatural, the 12 apostles walked with the Son of God, but where are they now? The dark and twisted fates that befell them will leave you breathless. Each one met an ending so shocking, it could make your skin crawl. From Judas' betrayal to Peter's denials, these men faced unimaginable trials that would send chills down your spine. Imagine living in a world where faith meant death and every step could lead to betrayal or worse. Take, for instance, the fate of Andrew, crucified on an X-shaped cross. He begged for mercy, yet met his end with a haunting smile, claiming he would never abandon his faith. Or how about James, who was thrown from the temple and then beaten to death with clubs, his screams mingling with the sound of a city turned sour with disbelief. Each of these stories haunts the alleyways and shadows of history, whispering tales of pain and terror that echo even today. But then, there's Andrew's brother, Peter, who, upon his execution, insisted on being crucified upside down, refusing to die the same way as his Lord. What led him to such madness? Could it be that the guilt ate away at his soul? Can you feel that knot in your stomach, that tight chest that arises from lives lost and faith tested? There's something eerie in each twist of their fates, a blurry line between honor and tragedy sinking deep into your consciousness, weaving a spell that holds you captive. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. And then there's Thomas, known forever as Doubting Thomas. He was subjected to horrific torture, all while clutching the pieces of his shattered faith. His screams must have echoed through time, begging for signs from above. Could such divine betrayal turn blood into ash, faith into fear? The possibility makes your heart race. Each fate tied together like a spider's web, intricate, dark, and mysteriously pulling you deeper into the shadows of history. Are you beginning to see how faith and betrayal intertwine, complicating the legacy of these men who dared stand beside the Messiah? What more secrets lay hidden, waiting to be uncovered? The silence that followed the martyrdom of the apostles lingered, thick like fog on an early morning. The world didn't simply forget the costs of faith, it twisted their stories into cautionary tales. But let us not overlook the fate of Simon, known as the Zealot. His passion for rebellion thickened the air around him, stirring a restless energy in those who followed. The echoes of his last stand would haunt the alleys for centuries. Legend has it that Simon was captured and pierced through by a sword, a warrior's end befitting his fiery spirit. But it wasn't the blow that drove the message home, it was the audacity of his last proclamation. With blood pooling beneath him, he shouted, "Rise in rebellion and fall for truth." Those were not just words, they hung in the air, electrifying the hearts of onlookers, planting seeds of insurrection. Then there's Philip. You might not know that his tragic end was overshadowed by bizarre omens that followed him. They say a snake slithered around him as he was tortured, a disturbing reflection of the treachery he faced. As the flames consumed him, they whispered in his ears, "Why not deny?" But he stood firm, grit hardening his resolve, proclaiming, "He is the light." Until the last flicker of life diminished. How powerful that conviction must have been to face those flames with unwavering faith. But let us talk about Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel. He supposedly met a grotesque end, flayed alive. Imagine the cries echoing in the air, a symphony of suffering that made even the bravest hesitate. Could you endure such agony? As the skin was torn from his body, Bartholomew's lips trembled, yet they still uttered praises, an act that defied even the fiercest pain. The darker the world became, the brighter his spirit shone, an uncomfortable conjunction of faith and torture. Can you feel the weight of their sacrifice? Each death, a chapter in the grim story of faith that reverberates far beyond their time. These were men whose names you've heard, but their stories demand to be felt. What this journey of suffering reveals is the link between agony and enlightenment, a bond that seems eternal, binding humanity to its choices over centuries. As tales of these apostles circulated like wildfire, they ignited both fear and admiration. Those who witnessed the aftermath of their brutal ends often questioned, was their reward in heaven worth such suffering on earth? The air was thick with doubt, and shadows danced around their legacy. Everyone soon wondered if the end justified their means. Those dark questions echoed through taverns and temples, and whispers of betrayal permeated society. Who could be trusted when the stakes were this high? The thin line between hatred and love started to bleed together. Through this swirling mass of uncertainty, one question stood out starkly: when the disciples fell, was it truly their faith that led them, or was it merely the desperate hope of breaking free from their earthly chains? The truth was buried beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to claw its way back into the light, and just as the dead silence settled, we turn to the haunting fate of James the Less, whose story lies veiled in an unsettling mystery. What led to his agonizing demise? Could the echoes of betrayal weave their way back into another life? The answers just might send shockwaves through everything you thought you knew. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits, hinting at the chaos brewing beneath the surface. James the Less had been a quiet observer, his life marked more by his silence than by cries for rebellion. Yet whispers spoke of his spine of steel hidden beneath a humble facade. What kind of courage would it take to face the coming storm? Rumors swirled around the marketplace, transforming each casual conversation into a crucible of suspicion. Those who once shared bread with James now debated his loyalty. Was he a traitor? A secret disciple of those who sought control over the fledgling movement? Only days ago, his presence had comforted the distressed, but now shadows of doubt crept around him like a noose tightening every night. No one could forget that night in the temple when he spoke with a voice that trembled yet commanded attention. What is faith without action? He had said, eyes burning with a conflicted fire. We must be the change, or we are nothing. His fervor sparked a flame in the hearts of many. But as rumors morphed into accusations, that same fire threatened to consume him. Then came the fateful evening when a band of masked figures stormed into the gathering, their intentions cloaked in malicious intent. Many recognized their shadows' former followers, now ruthless mercenaries. They shouted curses, their voices echoing like thunder in a darkened sky. James stood his ground then, it was in his nature. But would standing against the storm only lead to his doom? The blade glinted under the flickering lanterns as they closed in. We'll find the traitor among you. One of them roared. The silence that followed was deafening, but James's heart raced, thumping a desperate rhythm against his chest. Eyes turned from the aggressors to him, uncertain and fearful. Here, amid conspiracy and chaos, he realized the truth that had always lurked within him: fear could either paralyze or propel you. As the men advanced, James felt the weight of his own faith pressing down on him like storm clouds ready to burst. You seek to silence what cannot be silenced, he bellowed. Gasps filled the air, disbelief mingled with awe. I am no traitor, but a servant of the truth. But would this proclamation seal his fate? The air thickened with tension, electricity crackling across the space as if the very heavens were holding their breath. Suddenly, one of the mercenaries lunged, his dagger aimed like a lightning bolt. The crowd gasped as time seemed to slow. With every heartbeat, the world narrowed down to this one moment. James could feel the cold steel nearing him. Could he dodge it? Would they truly allow violence to snuff out his voice? Even then, he refused to back down. His hands clenched into fists, fingers trembling. The choice was clear: be crushed under the weight of betrayal or rise, even if it meant tasting blood. Just as the blade was about to connect, a figure leaped forward, pushing James aside. Chaos erupted. Screams mingled with clashing steel, and shadows turned to ghosts in the flickering light. James felt the world spin wildly. Who had come to his aid? And what would it cost them? In the midst of turmoil, one question carved itself into his mind: what price are you willing to pay for your truth? Just when it seemed everything could still be salvaged, a sharp cry pierced the tumult, the unmistakable voice of betrayal crystal clear above the chaos. Betrayal from an unexpected ally, could it be true? The night had only just begun, and its depths were darker than anyone could foresee. Would this betrayal lead to James's end or unlock a path toward a greater truth? The branches of fate twisted tighter, and only time would tell. The crowd surged like a turbulent sea, fear and anger intermingling as screams echoed off the temple walls. James struggled to process the chaos unfolding around him. The figure that had pushed him aside now faced the mercenaries with a defiance that sparked a flicker of hope in his chest. But who was it? Through the haze, he squinted, the flickering lantern light revealing a familiar outline. It was Matthew, a man who had always stood at the periphery, quietly observing. James felt a rush of gratitude, but it was quickly swallowed by dread. Matthew was brave, but reckless courage could also slip easily into folly. "Get out of here!" Matthew shouted, deflecting another blow aimed at him. His arms were no match for the hunger of anger that filled the mercenaries, but still, he stood tall. Each defiant word sliced through James's heart like a dagger. The crowd behind them was paralyzed, rooted by fear, murmurs of disloyalty tangled in their throats. "Matthew! Come back!" James shouted, his voice swallowed by the growing clamor. The battle raged around him, a whirlwind of desperation and shattered trust. Each clash of steel resonated with the weight of a truth that seemed to unravel with every strike. Was Matthew's bravery worth the risk? Or was he simply fueling the fire of destruction? Then, the moment froze. A man, larger than life, charged into the throng. Tall and brawny, he brandished a sword that glinted ominously in the night. It was Peter, his stormy eyes scanning the crowd with fierce intensity. He weaved through the chaos, shoving aside anyone who dared block his path. Relief washed over James, mixed with a pressing fear for what would come next. "You fight for the wrong cause," Peter bellowed, directing his ire toward the mercenaries. "You threaten our very souls." In that instant, something clicked in James's mind. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. This was about a belief. A belief that demanded action, that required sacrifice, but just as Peter charged to aid Matthew, another masked figure lunged forward, a dagger raised high. James could feel it, the tension crackled in the air, burning through the fray like embers. "No!" he shouted, desperation fueling his lungs as he hurled himself forward, adrenaline coursing through him. The shock of movement propelled him into the fray. Every instinct screamed for him to retreat, to flee while he still could, but something stronger pulled him forward, the weight of their shared fate. That he closed the distance in moments, lunging toward Peter and Matthew just as the dagger arced down. Time stretched again, slow and deliberate. The world around them faded, reducing itself to this singular, terrifying moment. Would they be too late? The sound of the dagger met flesh in an agonizing crash, followed by an echoing gasp that silenced the crowd. James felt his heart drop. He could not breathe. The mercenaries halted, their breath hanging heavy in the air, as the reality of their brutal intentions dawned on them. James, caught in the swell of shock and horror, turned slowly, dread pooling in his stomach. Who had fallen? Who among them would bear the scar of this terrible night? The answer came as a whisper, barely audible above the gasps. "It wasn't he supposed to be like this?" He turned back, dread coiling tighter in his chest. What had this escalated into? The scene was chaotic, everything blurring, leaving him with a single horrific thought. The betrayal was deeper than he had ever imagined. That he needed to know who had betrayed them, but with every heartbeat, it slipped further away. The night was not over yet. There were still shadows lurking, allies turning. As the echoes of that haunting gasp filled the air, uncertainty snagged at James's heart. How much more pain would they endure before dawn illuminated the truth? The crowd began to shift, murmurs picked up like the wind before a storm. Would they still stand together, or would the seeds of betrayal continue to grow? And just then, a sharp voice cut through the tension. "I know who the traitor is." Did the word signal hope, or was it merely the start of a deeper unraveling? As James turned, the darkness seemed to close in even tighter, reality bending toward ultimate revelation. Would he survive the truth? The crowd pulsated with uncertainty, a sea of anxious faces caught in the grip of fear. James's heart raced as he turned toward the source of the voice, seeking any glimmer of light in the enveloping darkness. The speaker, a frail man with desperate eyes, stood on a makeshift platform, highlighted by a flickering torch. He looked as if he held a secret that could destabilize their very existence. "Who is it?" Someone yelled from the back of the crowd, a mix of frustration and fear threading through the words. The murmur swelled, desperation clawing at their throats. "I can," the man began, his voice trembling, but the words were cut short by the distinct sound of metal clattering to stone. In the fray, a mercenary had lost grip of his weapon, the blade slipping and falling soundlessly amidst the chaos. It was a minor event, yet it seemed to stretch endlessly, grabbing everyone's attention, binding them closer together in this moment of pause. James felt the weight of every gaze bearing down on him, the shared whispers of blame and accusation tightening around him like a noose. It was one thing to be a part of this collective fight, but now he felt exposed, vulnerable. They would all look for someone to blame. "Let him speak," shouted a robust woman up front, her voice remarkably steady amid the trembling chaos. James recognized her as Clara, a survivor of past skirmishes, someone who had endured far worse. Perhaps, he hoped, she would help steer them away from madness. Okay, the man on the platform regained his composure. "It's Alan. He's the one feeding information to the mercenaries. He's the traitor." His words hung in the air like a death warrant. Gasps echoed through the crowd, disbelief setting in like a fog. "Alan?" James's stomach dropped. With every accusation, the rift within the group threatened to widen. The murmurs grew louder, accusations flying. Who among them could be trusted now? Faces twisted in anger, betrayal etched into their features. Before James could process it all, he spotted Alan across the throng. He appeared startled, eyes wide with shock as the crowd's fury turned toward him. The truth could fracture them, could send them spiraling into chaos. He sprinted a few steps, driven by a mix of urgency and outrage. "Wait!" Alan would never, he shouted, though his own heart wavered. How could he defend someone without proof? What if he was wrong? But there was no time to doubt, he had to get to him before the crowd decided they deserved a scapegoat, but the crowd was not listening. They pressed forward, a coiled spring ready to unravel. Accusations flew like arrows, piercing the tense air. "Liar! Traitor! Hang him!" James fought against the crush of bodies, adrenaline surging through him. He thought of Matthew and Peter, who had chosen courage when the stakes were high, thoughts of loyalty colliding with the fear that crept further into his bones. Then, just as he reached Alan, the shouting reached a fever pitch. Someone yelled, "Grab him!" And suddenly, hands reached toward them, eager to drag Alan to judgment. "Stop!" James shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. As he faced the angry mob, he wondered if they still remembered why they fought. Could it all be unraveling because of one man? But unexpectedly, a blow landed to the side of Alan's face, stunning him. Blood dripped from his lips as he stumbled. James's rage ignited. "Enough!" he yelled, furiously pushing through the throng to shield his friend. Time slowed. The crowd was aroar, but he saw Alan's eyes, wide with fear, darting back toward him. Was it for help or accusation he sought? It didn't matter. All that mattered was bringing Alan back into the fold. Then, a chilling voice pierced the chaos. "You really think that's the worst of it?" The crowd froze, each face tracing the voice to its origin. A shadowy figure perched on the temple steps, cloaked and watching with a sinister calm. James's heart pounded. What now? Could one more revelation break the fragile bonds they had left? As uncertainty gripped him once again, he realized their darkest night had only just begun. Look closely if you dare, the figure warned, for I know more than just the traitor who was this mysterious shadow. What deeper secret loomed over them, threatening to consume not just Alan, but them all? The shadow shifted, draped in an unsettling cloak that swallowed the flickering torchlight. The crowd, once a boiling pot of rage, now pulsated with a different kind of fear, one that swept through them like a cold wind, paralyzing their anger into a tense anticipation. Do you think Alan is the only traitor among you? The figure continued, slow and deliberate. Each word landed like a heavy rock, resonating in the hearts of those assembled. Whispers surged through the crowd like an electric current, igniting suspicion. Suddenly, the atmosphere crackled with tension. James could see the uncertainty in faces he once thought trustworthy. Clara stood at the front, her brow furrowed, uncertainty etched across her features. Had she audible doubts too? Enough of this. Someone shouted, a man toward the back, his voice rising above the cacophony. We need to find the real traitor before it's too late. Who are you to speak? Clara retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. What proof do you have? The figure on the steps leaned forward, unbothered, as if savoring the chaos. I've seen it lurking in the shadows, planning our demise, they said cryptically, fixing their gaze on Alan, still crumpled on the ground, blood trickling from his lip. All this time you've trusted the wrong people, engaged in blind loyalty. But now the figure raised a thin finger toward James. Now you must choose. Who will you stand beside? James's heart raced. He was trapped in a nightmare where the lines between friend and foe blurred. This is madness. He shouted, hoping to break the spell of fear gripping the crowd. Alan is innocent. Believe me, he would never, would he? The figure interjected coolly, tilting their head as if judging a gnarled tree. It's easy to proclaim loyalty when it costs you nothing. But what happens when survival hangs by a thread? Silence fell like a thick fog. Faces twisted, eyes searched each other for confirmation of their worst fears. Trust, once a solid bond, warped into fragile strings held by fraying threads. James felt sweat form at his temples, fear giving rise to something darker. Every secret has a price, the cloaked figure continued, their voice curling like smoke. I can reveal the truths that lie beneath the lies, but it requires your silence. An exchange shut it down. James implored. We won't play into your sick game. The figure chuckled, a haunting sound that sent chills down James's spine. You'll soon find that the game is already underway. Suddenly, a murmur caught his attention. A group of men stood in the back, Matthew, Peter, and others, their expressions grim. James's pulse quickened, they were the ones he'd always counted on. Guys. We need to stand firm. But their faces were hard, shadows of doubt lingering in their eyes. What if it's true, James? Matthew spoke, his voice shaking. What if Alan isn't who we thought he was? No. We can't go down that path. James shouted, desperation clawing at his heart. But uncertainty loomed over their group like a dark cloud. As murmurs grew in volume, it felt as if the whole world had tilted off its axis. Before he could react, the shadow stepped down from the temple steps, gliding like a predator stalking prey. Let us make this more interesting, they said. Let us expose the true intentions of Alan and the rest before dawn. Why would you do this? Clara's voice trembled, a mix of courage and fear. Because every world needs a sacrifice, the figure whispered. With that, they melted back into the darkness, leaving James with a chilling emptiness. Time ticked away like a countdown, each second drawing nearer to a revelation that could tear them apart. Could their fragile unity withstand the test? Desperation thundered in his chest as he shouted to the crowd, we must stand together. Or risk everything we've built? But in the distance, a whisper echoed ominously through the night, the worst is yet to come. What would dawn bring? Would the bonds of friendship shatter under the weight of betrayal? The crowd's breath hung heavy in the air, a muffled rhythm of fear and uncertainty. James could see the flickering of torches casting erratic shadows, making specters dance along the rough walls. Every face was a mask now, confusion, doubt, and resentment etched deep into their features. Clara's gaze slipped from his, passing over to Alan, still vulnerable on the ground, blood pooling around him like ink stains on parchment. "Everyone, listen!" James shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "We can't afford to turn on each other. Fear is a weapon. Don't let it divide us." But the murmurs swelled, an overwhelming tide of suspicion that threatened to swallow him whole. Clara's eyes glazed over with uncertainty, twisting the knife deeper in James's chest. He staggered back, extreme dread flooding his senses. Then, before he could regain his footing, the men who once stood as allies began to shift, their allegiance mired in doubt. "James, we don't know what to believe," Matthew said again, his tone offended yet fragile, as if he was peering down into an abyss. "The figure may be right. We've trusted blindly, and what if—" "No!" James interrupted, his heart pounding. "We know Alan. We've fought side by side. How can look at him?" shouted another, pointing at Alan, who stirred weakly but remained lifeless under the weight of accusation. "Is he worth the risk?" As if summoned by the chaos, two figures emerged from the shadows, Felix and Nadia, their expressions hardened and resolute. "We need to separate fact from fiction," Felix declared, cutting through the noise like a knife. "It's true that secrets fester within our ranks. So then, let us find out who is telling the truth." "What are you suggesting?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking with fear that seeped into the edges of her bravery. Felix glanced at James, then back to the crowd. "We need to draw the lines now. Let each of us declare our loyalty before the night slips away. Expose any traitors among us." An electric shock coursed through the gathered people, raising whispers to fever pitch. It felt like the shards of trust were being thrown down onto concrete, shattering what was left of their unity. "Loyalty?" spat Matthew, now looking worse for wear. "What do you expect from us? A show of faith when we're drowning in doubt? For God's sake, we can't do this now." James rasped, panic constricting his throat. "This isn't what we should be doing." The figure's voice echoed hauntingly in his mind. Every world needs a sacrifice. The tension hung thick, and as hours slipped into a strangling silence, a sound echoed from the forest beyond, a shrill scream cutting through the night like a jagged shard of glass. Every head turned as if pulled by an invisible thread, the crowd stiffening in paralysis. "What was that?" someone whimpered, their voice barely escaping their lips. Suddenly, chaos erupted. People shifted, seeking shelter, their primitive instincts igniting. James felt the world around him spin. He grabbed Clara's hand, fiercely determined to protect her. "We need to stay together." But confusion twisted through the crowd, and bodies collided in panic. Faces morphed into symbols of terror as they scrambled to the edges, pulling away from one another like shadowy apparitions. As the weight of fear spiraled out of control, James could barely keep Clara by his side. He scanned the frantic eyes of the crowd, understanding that the enemy was no longer out there, lurking in the shadows. It was among them, the uncertainty, the doubt, seeded by betrayal. "Stay close," he shouted against the din of panic. But the chaos erupted around him as someone dashed across the flickering torchlight toward the woods, a shadow sprinting for unknown horrors. "Wait!" James cried, but they were gone, swallowed whole by the darkness. Once more, silence cloaked the void left in their absence, and then two figures stumbled from the woods, bloodied and breathless. The crowd froze in collective horror, hearts racing in panic. The dawn would expose the truth, but what would be left of them once it did? "What happened?" James yelled, fear gnawing at his insides. The figures turned, eyes wide with fear, and the first chilling words echoed from trembling lips, "We weren't alone out there." What had they unleashed in the night? And as they faced the coming dawn, could they bear the truth? The crowd remained frozen, the air alive with the unspoken horror of the two bloodied figures. A million questions hung in the air, but none dared to voice them. The figures breathed heavily, their chests rising and falling like they had just escaped the grasp of the devil himself. "Please, tell us what happened," Clara cried, desperation pinching her voice as she tugged at James's arm, urging him to take action. I don't know," one of the newcomers, Leo, gasped. He clenched his jaw, eyes darting nervously to the shadows beyond the torches. "We went looking for answers. But there was something out there, something, watching us in the trees." "Watching?" Matthew echoed, skepticism knitting his brows. "You mean you saw something?" "Yes," Nadia interjected, her hands trembling as she pointed into the thick darkness that loomed beyond. "We heard whispering, voices that didn't belong to any of us. Then, it came for us." A wave of murmurs crashed through the crowd like a shifting tide, pulling together suspicions and almost tangible fear. James felt the tremors beneath their feet, a collective anxiety that felt like the earth was cracking. He stepped forward, meeting the wide eyes of Leo, who seemed on the brink of madness. "What did you see?" James pressed, his heart thudding against his ribs. Leo glanced down at their blood-streaked clothes, swallowing hard. "Something that didn't belong in this world. It had eyes. More shadows than flesh. I thought it was going to pull us in." "Pull you in where?" Clara insisted, her voice now steadying, pulling James back into their shared determination. "To the dark," Nadia whispered, her breath hitching. "It wanted to take us deeper into the woods, into that place where light dies." Then, like a dam bursting, panic erupted in the crowd. People scuttled back, forming an ever-widening circle around the figures. "We shouldn't have gone in," Matthew shouted, terror cloaking his voice. "You brought it back with you, whatever that thing is." James felt the tide of doubt crashing toward them, the currents swirling around Clara as she steadied herself, her grip on his hand tightening. The weight of accusing eyes bore down on them, hungry for a scapegoat. "But we didn't know," Leo cried, voice cracking. "We were just trying to find Alan. We thought we could help." "Help?" A voice from the back sneered. "By almost getting yourselves killed?" Fear coiled tightly in James's chest. The darkness was creeping closer, no longer an unseen threat but a shade born from their fears, crawling with insinuations. He fought through the tumult, wrestling with the need to maintain unity. They needed a plan, a foundation to stabilize the trembling ground beneath them. "Stop!" James roared, silencing the uproar with a resonating command that sent ripples through the crowd. "If we don't work together, we'll lose everything. We can't let these fears tear us apart. There's a monster out there, but if we're divided, it will devour us whole." "But what if the monster is one of us?" Someone shouted, their voice laced with bitterness. The murmurings rose, a ripple of uncertainty, eyes darting suspiciously. In this moment, James realized doubt wasn't just in the forest, it had slithered into their hearts. The real danger loomed in the fear of betrayal, of turning against those they once called friends. Nadia stepped closer, her voice fragile yet firm. "We need to confront what's real. We need a plan to find Alan and end this nightmare." "That's a death sentence," Matthew quipped bitterly. "And who do you trust with that? The ones who survived or the ones left behind?" An unsettling silence fell, a suffocating awareness that they would soon have to face themselves in a way they never imagined. "Let us gather supplies before it's too late," James urged, his throat dry, attempting to rally them. "If we work together." The words had barely escaped his lips when a crack echoed from the trees, a sound more monstrous than the screams they had heard before. Something stirred in the darkness, an unnatural stirring of branches. What was that? Someone gasped, horror painting their features. What's out there? Clara whispered, her grip tightening. James swallowed hard, feeling the weight of unseen eyes watching them. And in that moment, he understood with shocking clarity this confrontation wouldn't just be with the terror that lurked outside. It would test the very fabric of trust among them. Whatever it is, he said, fighting against the chill creeping up his spine, we need to stand together. But will they? As shadows danced closer, questions loomed heavier than ever. In the silence that followed, underneath the trees, the first signs of dread rippled through the crowd. Was it already too late to save them all? A stifling silence cloaked the crowd, and James felt the air thick with dread. The shadows shifted at the tree lean, a dark dance that mirrored the turmoil in their hearts. Clara's grip on his arm tightened further, her nails biting into his skin, grounding him under the weight of uncertainty. Listen to me. James shouted, desperation sharpening his voice. We need to move back from the trees. If something's out there, we can't let it draw us in. Move back? And leave them in there, someone yelled, pointing at Leo and Nadia, who stood trembling, their bloodied clothes a stark reminder of the terror that had unleashed on them. The crowd's fear surged like a wave, drawing everyone into a vortex of panic. We can't just leave them. Clara's voice wavered. They need us. In that moment, a flicker caught James's eye, something deeper in the woods, a flicker of an unnatural light that illuminated the darkness like a beacon. People around him gasped, eyes growing wide. The forest seemed to pulse, reveling in their terror. This isn't just fear, Nadia said, her voice quivering as she stepped forward, igniting whispers. It's like it's alive. It knows we're here. James felt the coldness grip his heart, pulsing with every word she spoke. This wasn't mere terror, it was a predator drawing its prey closer. Stay calm. James urged, his own voice trembling against the growing panic. We must regroup the supplies and keep moving. We can't let whatever that light is get to us. But someone shouted back, you want to walk right into that? The crowd hesitated, glancing at each other, fear radiating through their collective anxiety. Then crack. A twig snapped violently, echoing through the confused murmurs, silencing them. Everyone turned as one, watching as shadows lengthened and thickened, twisting against the light of the torches. The darkness felt like a living entity, creeping toward them with a purpose that terrified them more than any tangible monster. What was that? Someone whispered, their breath hitching. You saw it too, right? Leo asked, his eyes wide with panic. I'm not crazy, am I? No, you're not, Nadia replied, her voice barely audible. It was something moving. Something inhuman. It was as if the very forest conspired against them, the whispering winds carrying mocking laughter that chilled their bones. Let us go. James snapped again, gesturing toward the path leading away from the tree lean. But then, a figure stepped out of the shadows, slipping between two massive oaks. It was Alan, the crowd gasped audibly, confusion flooding their eyes. Alan looked different, though. His clothes were tattered and muddy, his face drawn, eyes sunken deep into his skull. Help, he croaked, reaching out as if he could grasp hold of their sanity. Alan! Clara cried out, her earlier resolve shattering into a mix of elation and dread. But James sensed something more in his friend's appearance that sent alarm bells ringing through him. The shadows behind Alan seemed to thicken, as if they pulsed with life, waiting for commands. Is it really you? Matthew called, caution etching each word. Alan took a staggering step forward, the disarray of his presence colliding with the collective hope of rescue. You have to get out, it's not safe, it's coming. Coming? Leo echoed, dread washing back over everyone like a tidal wave. It wants you. Just then, the unmistakable crackling sound returned, this time accompanied by the rustling of branches snapping like dry bones. The darkness shifted again, exposing something huge lurking, something that vibrated with raw, hungry energy. A tangled silken whisper floated through the air. You can't run from your fate. James felt a tremor ripple through the crowd. The questions that had been swirling earlier morphed into a singular, undeniable truth: no one was safe anymore. Hope began to fray as fear gripped their hearts like a vice. Get him inside the circle. Someone shouted, breaking the spell of silence. But James knew it wasn't going to be that simple. As Alan stumbled forward, the shadows behind him seemed to crawl with menacing intent. What do we do? Clara's voice cracked as she looked to him, seeking reassurance he desperately wanted to give. James felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him harder than ever. The last threads of trust among them dangled precariously, fluttering between hope and impending doom, and in that instant, he realized the real monster they faced might not just be lurking in the dark. With breath caught in his throat, he steeled himself. We need to fight. But as desperation clutched at their chests, the ground beneath them trembled ominously. In that heartbeat, the shadows swelled, and James knew it was time to make a choice, but at what cost? Will they believe me? He wondered. What lurked in the dark was awakening, and soon, they'd have to choose, fight against the shadows or become part of them. What he didn't know was that the hardest choice was still yet to come. The night's tension pressed down heavily on James, like a leaden blanket suffocating any flicker of hope. Alan stumbled closer, his ragged breath sending shivers through the crowd. You have to believe me. It's out there, he gasped, pointing a trembling finger toward the darkness that loomed beyond the flickering torchlight. Believe you? Matthew spat, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. How can we trust anything you say? The crowd began to murmur, a swirling current of doubt overtaking their fear. James's heart raced. They were standing on the edge of a precipice. Listen. He called out, urgency slicing through his voice. We can't fall apart now. If we do, we're just inviting whatever's out there to claim us one by one. Claim us how? Someone shouted, their voice trembling. What did you bring back with you? The air crackled with apprehension. Shadows shifted just beyond the trees, and with each gust of wind, silence settled over the crowd like a weight. James felt the collective heartbeat in the air. They needed a leader, someone who could light the way through this suffocating darkness. Alan! He shouted, pulling the crowd's attention back to his friend. What did you see? What's coming? Alan opened his mouth, but fear clawed at him, making his words falter. It knows our fears. It feeds on our doubt. I felt it watching. His voice choked off, eyes darting toward the woods as if a nightmare lurked, breathing right behind him. I'll go. Clara announced, her resolve fiercely igniting the dim hope within James. I'll go with you, Alan. They can't take you if we stand together. No. James shouted, panic churning in his gut. It'll isolate you. We need to fight in unity, not have individuals flee into the danger. Flee? You think I'm running? She countered, her voice a steady flame amidst rising chaos. Clara, there's strength in numbers. He argued, realizing his desperation clung to her. Strength is only worth something if we have a plan. Clara shot back, her expression fierce. And right now, that plan needs courage. Before James could say more, the ground beneath them quaked, a low rumble shaking the earth. The shadows surged forward, the threatening rustles crescendoed, awakening primal tears of terror. The air turned electric, and the darkness seemed to thick like smoke. Eyes filled with horror and uncertainty roamed the crowd. Get behind me! James yelled, throwing out his arms as if to shield them all as he strived to grab hold of his own wavering confidence. We'll fight together. But Matthew's voice serrated the moment. What if we lose everything? His words sliced into the fray, laden with despair. What if betrayal runs deeper than we imagine? James felt the weight of their shared experience crushing him. He pushed through, his heart pounding for survival, for unity. Together, we stand. No one should have to face this alone. Together, echoed Nadia, her voice steady and resolute, rallying behind him. We have to face the darkness together. And in that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere around them. Alan's eyes met James's, and for the first time, they saw a flicker of trust pouring through the surrounding shadows. The crowd hesitated, uncertainty lingering, but trust began to congeal amongst them. They were all standing on the edge of something unknown, facing an enemy that fed off their fears. Who will stand with me? James called, feeling adrenaline course through his veins, charging him forward. Who believes we can confront this? One by one, hands reached out, extended fingers grasping toward the center of their gathered might, resolve sparking like fireflies scattering the night. I will stand, Matthew said, eyes glimmering with rekindled faith. I will stand, Nadia echoed, her fierce spirit illuminating the night with determination. I will stand. Clara shouted, stepping forward, defiance shining through her fear. Then it's decided, James declared, energy coiling within each heartbeat. We face the dark together. As the shadows shifted beyond the trees, the first signs of dawn began to lighten the horizon. Strike now. Before the darkness consumes us. James shouted, armed with conviction. They formed a jagged line against the backdrop of encroaching shadows, ready to confront anything that crawled forth. The sounds grew louder, a palpable tension humming in the air, and just as dawn painted the sky, silhouettes emerged from the depths of the woods, threatening, formidable shapes lurking on the edge of brightness. Charge! James roared, adrenaline surging as they moved as one united force, an unstoppable wave going against the entity that threatened to suffocate them. Together, they charged into the unknown. Together, they stepped toward the light, hoping it would not betray them. As they drove into the chaos, James realized the truth nestled behind their fears. The real power lay not just against the shadows that hunted them but within the strength they forged together, and in that final reckoning, they discovered the shadows' bared teeth held no power against the light of unity, friendship, and the courage that pulsed through their veins. Together. They shouted, a chorus blaring against the thick fog of despair. Their fateful dawn had come, but the light they carried burned brighter than fear. James closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of his friends beside him, the unbreakable bond that could slice through even the darkest night. In this moment, he knew, no matter what haunted the night or led them astray, together they would face it all, together they were unstoppable. Now, this is the moment to act. You need to subscribe now so you don't miss any more exclusive stories that will take you on this wild ride. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm, and let's show the world our strength. I want to hear from you in the comments. Flood the section with your reactions and theories about what you think happens next. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to witness this incredible conclusion. Stand with us together, we're unstoppable.